Welcome to Sword and Shield, the official podcast of the 960th Cyberspace Wing. Join us for insight, knowledge, mentorship, and some fun as we discuss relevant topics in and around our wing. Please understand that the views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of the U.S. Air Force nor the Air Force Reserve, and no endorsement of any particular person or business is ever intended.
Welcome to another episode of the Sword and Shield. I am Chief Master Sergeant Christopher Howard, 960 of COG SEL, and today with me I have
Master Sgt. Estes, 960 the Cyberspace Wing, First Sergeant, and 854 COS, First Sergeant.
And
Captain Jamillah Gonzalez, 960 as Cyber Wing Executive Officer.
Thank you both for joining me today. And today I would love to talk to both of you about breadth versus depth. When we talk about leadership, when we talk about experience, when we talk about what we're looking for opportunities, what do you see as the most important? Sorry, Estes, breadth or depth?
To me, it's breadth.
Okay.
Because, and I can only speak for my, not career field, but my career as a whole. Active duty, TR, AGR, civilian, security forces, AGR First Sergeant, just having those different experiences and opportunities to prepare me to be the senior NCO I am today, as opposed to somebody with depth who's been in the same wing for their whole career and having never moved to another squadron and or a special duty or even another base.
Okay. What about you, Capt?
So when I think of breadth, I think overall just experiences that kind of bring you to who you are and what you've developed to be. And then when I think of depth, my mind goes to like technical expertise, but there could just be depth of knowledge and mission sets, in maybe even to say in leadership skills. If I try to think of it in that regard, how much knowledge do you have in what particular function you're doing at the time? So I do think that overall breadth of experience would be what I think is the most important, but both are necessary.
No, I agree, right? So when we talk about breadth versus depth, the argument always, especially within the reserves, is, hey, I'm a one unit here. The whole idea is that we're going to be the subject matter experts. So why is depth not a key perspective? Because there's a misnomer about breadth as well, right? So breadth could be, I have to move. I don't want to move. So how do you argue, how do I get breadth of experience when this is the only unit that holds my AFSC in this region? How do I grow, right? So if I'm a tech sergeant, want to be a command chief, how do I get there from here, right? Let's use a unit like, let's say, Offutt, right? Where there's not a wing, there's one unit, maybe two units when it comes to other wings that have reserve units, but there's no real development or opportunity as far as multiple units with the same FSC. How would you argue, how do I get breadth?
You can get breadth in a lot of different ways. You can apply for a special duty. You can apply to become part of an honor guard unit, something like that. You can go on orders with another organization and learn some different type of skills. You can shadow someone in another career field or another office. You can get mentorship from an individual, and you can cross-train to get breadth. So those are some options there.
And kind of expanding on what you had, Captain, what would you give as advice?
So advice, if there was someone that particularly wanted to stay in a location, then breadth of experience could come from volunteer opportunities, maybe deployments, possibly looking to grow with educational experience, going through, reaching out to different levels of the chain of command to get inputs and perspective as to where maybe those individuals would want to have them focus, where sometimes when you're only looking at yourself, you may not see areas of where maybe you could benefit from certain experiences. So going to different levels of mentorship could bring ideas. And something else will come back to me, but I do have something else that
Yeah, no worries. So what I like to break this down to, so when this conversation comes up, it's usually after stratifications. It's after selection boards for particular jobs. There's a lot of arguments in leadership about what are we looking for in individuals, and then there's misnomers about breadth versus depth. I think you two really hit on a number of things when we talk about some of the outside perspectives about breadth, right? And to kind of pick at that, right? So internally to the wing, right? So we have some unique skill sets. So we definitely are looking for some depth in knowledge when we talk about cybersecurity, cyber domain, and even from leadership, we're wanting individuals that have some kind of depth in knowledge, right? If you're too shallow in that knowledge, then there's going to be holes, barriers, or gaps that we have to cover. So we want to get more depth in that knowledge, but we also want a breadth of experience. I would argue that there's a really good balance of both to get you there. When we talk about reservists and staying within certain regions or certain areas for their job or their family, then, it's one of the reasons why we join more often than not. And kind of picking through that is internally to the 960 Cyber Wing, for example, let's just say you're at JBSA, you're Intel or you're cyber. Maybe you don't have a lot of avenues, but we want to look at depth and breadth. What about wing priorities? Right? How there I'm getting leadership, and then depending on what the priority is, then maybe I'm even getting some depth and knowledge, right? When I take on other roles within inside of an organization, it's not always being in the same job, in the same position, in the same work center, right? How am I learning and expanding upon my depth of knowledge as far as my career, depth of knowledge as far as my leadership, as well as getting a breadth of experience, right? If for instance, I'm a SATCOMmer by trade, which is RF transmissions, and then, it's kind of grown. If I only did the same kind of SATCOM work my whole career, I'd be very siloed out. And that's really what we're concerned about, right? We get I think sometimes the confusion is that depth equals siloing, and breadth means flattening out. So that whole comment about jack of all trades, master of none, right? You want to have the masters. So did I silo them out, or do I have that jack of all trades? Which did I, breadth it out, right? How do we find the balance? What kind of advice would you give, Sergeant Estes, on kind of tackling that balance between getting enough knowledge and enough experience across the board as far as depth and breadth?
So when the chiefs or the sales are having those conversations and they're stratting or they're selecting individuals for positions, I think a conversation needs to be had at that level, and even in the NCO level, where as we're developing leaders and we're leveraging that talent management, we're looking at people's documents and we're saying, okay, this individual doesn't have this, but if they go and work this priority, or if they go and do, become an exec counsel on the top 3, this will get them where they need to go to make that next step. And so it's not a matter of looking back after the fact and saying, oh, well, this individual didn't get this position because of this reason. Why don't we look at their packages ahead of time? And I know that's a lot of work and, we don't have time on our hands, but I think that it would be a great opportunity to develop our people and mentor them to get them to that position for when the time comes for them to apply for it.
Right. It goes back to a conversation that you and I have often and we've had in the past, is that mentorship piece, right? So as we go through that mentorship process, bringing down a CDB, which is a career data brief, right? Looking at what's on those records, right? Looking at whether their experiences are, and also identifying where in their APRs we're showing some of that both breadth and depth, right? And making sure that we're capturing it appropriately to show. Now, even if I stay within this organization, I can still show both based on job title changes, not just to change it for whatever reason, but honest job changes, taking on and tackling priorities, taking on, especially as a younger airman, different additional duties and conquering those things and moving forward. MG, you have a wide breadth of experience being prior enlisted and your roles as an officer as well. What else could you add to this?
So circling back to when we were talking about ways to gather breadth of experience, it came up in what you were saying, Sergeant Estes, and that was memberships in private organizations. So finding opportunities to participate in private organizations, I wanted to mention that, as well as what you mentioned a couple times, Chief, which was participation in the strategic alignments and the priority developments that come from those strategic alignments. So that terminology is used frequently in the reserve and also in active duty. So those two areas would be opportunities where someone could obtain breadth of experience. Then from there, when it comes to tackling the balance between breadth and depth, I think of what you said with mentorship, because in certain roles, in some areas, you may need to focus on breadth, but then there may be skill sets in that role where you need to focus on depth. And when I think of depth, I think how you gather that will be more through education. And sometimes what you had said, Sergeant Estes, which would be shadowing. What is it that someone's already doing so that you can, again, maybe see that technical expert level that you may need in your current role. So when we talk about obtaining that balance, I think it comes to understanding what your role is at the time in that organization and knowing where you need to focus on for the breadth and where you need to focus on for the depth. So I just think every function that we have does require both, and finding that balance can come through mentorship.
Right. And it's always, it comes down to commitment, right? Whether you're driving towards different types of jobs for breadth, whether it's putting forth the effort to educate yourself to get the experiences and knowledge for the depth, and then leveraging both, right? And that's the thing I think where we get kind of mixed signals and not a clear understanding of why I want to tackle this subject is, there's ways to get both of these, and it's really about reflection. If we're talking about a hiring board, you get a couple of looks. You get the initial application package, and then you get the interview. So how do I capture all that, right? If I'm looking at for progression or development boards, then how has that been captured in my records appropriately, right? So showing that breadth of experience in different leadership roles, like you identified, Shirt, that being a first sergeant or taking on additional types of roles like honor guard or special duties all come into some of the breadth. Going on exercises and deployments, as the captain pointed out as well, for some of that depth of knowledge and experience, and making sure that's all captured in the records. And then really being able to then tailor that knowledge, right? Making the time and effort in taking the time to cognitively thread all these pieces together come into play. Because like if I was to go to an interview board for a job, I have to be able to show that I have both breadth of knowledge and experience and a depth of knowledge and experience. And then how do I weave that together? And that takes a lot of time. I'm not that smart. I just spend a lot of time thinking about how do I put this piece to this piece to this piece to that piece and weave it all together to show that, okay, all this years of just getting the poop kicked out of me for my job, what did I learn from it? And why is it useful to you as a hiring official? Or why is it useful for me to become the next chief or the next senior or the NCOIC of this work center, right? So what are your thoughts, Sergeant Estes?
So I like to think of things kind of backwards sometimes. And, being a civilian, I've had to be that individual applying for a position and understanding, do my documents or does my resume or whatever line up with what the KSAs are? And so a lot of times if you want to, measure where you're at to where you want to go, you actually look at those job announcements and you rack and stack based on what you have. And so if you don't have those things, then those are the goals that you go for. And so if I am a senior NCO like I am, and I want to look at a senior master sergeant position within this wing or somewhere else, I need to be looking at what those KSAs are for that position and see if I'm ready for it or not. And so I think it like you said, it takes a lot of time. One important thing that I thought about while everybody was talking is that not only do you need to be able to speak to that breadth and depth, but you have to make sure your records are good to go too, because a lot of times if an in-person interview is not an option, those packages are the only thing that those hiring officials are looking at. And so if your documents are not right or accurate, then you're already pulled out of the pool to begin with. So the documents, it would be very beneficial for that individual to make sure that their documents are right and accurate as they move forward. And then the next piece would be, how do I articulate my knowledge and experience?
Right. Cam?
Looking at kind of what we've talked about so far, some of the things that I think about when breadth is mentioned is, like you said, maybe statuses, possibly enlisted officer, sometimes active duty, RTR, IMA, AGR, different types of assignments. All of those things I think often get brought up as what is breadth of experience. But I think earlier on, we kind of gave a lot of examples as to how you can obtain breadth of experience, whether or not, you've gone through those different statuses or had those different assignments. But I definitely think what Sergeant Estes, mentioned as far as having that ongoing reflection of what's in your records and looking ahead when it comes to your knowledge, skills, and abilities of that next position that you want to have, and pulling that up in advance and reflecting on that and using that kind of gives you that area of maybe where you do want to focus on getting more depth, because there's something in that role that you're looking to obtain that maybe you're not as strong in, or there may be indicators of where you need to obtain more breadth, and it'll also guide you. So I think that's a great tool to use to help focus on where you may be needing more breadth or depth.
And one more piece I want to throw in that before we close out too is comfortable, right? Right? Are we challenging ourselves both from a breadth and depth perspective to challenge what is comfortable? Am I challenging myself to be a better technician, a better analyst, a better leader, right? And how am I doing that? Am I driving to being getting this knowledge either through more diving into the career field or in that particular job for the depth, or am I driving myself to more breadth as well to challenge my comfort zone, right? So for me personally, I was kind of a crusty maintainer operator, right? I did tactical, expeditionary, I did fixed comm, I did all these different things, and it was, always, slap them upside the head, just get after it, rumble, knuckle dragging, cussing and fussing type of person. And one of the roles I took on after that at the turning point in my career was to be a first sergeant, knowing it was going to challenge me not to be so harsh, right? I think that I mentioned before that I was kind of known to be as the bulldog or the meat grinder when it came to developing the leadership and handling certain things. So I was that rough person. And being a first, not to say I'm not now, but anyways, but as a first sergeant, I challenged my skill set. So are you as individuals challenging yourself, right?
Chief, you definitely softened up if you were the bulldog. So just know that.
I actually got, I had a leader, a captain say, I wish I never let you off the leash at one point in my career.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I want to add to this conversation, and I think you said it in the beginning, is that you might find that you think a little bit differently after we have this conversation. Because I was thinking, breadth was more important. And so we've heard, right? Mm-hmm. I've been told before that breadth is more important, but there's a lot to be said about depth being important as well. Because when I think about how often we move around as reservists, or some of us do, depending on, hey, you got to get that breadth, or my spouse is moving and now I have to find a position at Robbins, or whatever the case is. We lose a lot of continuity in those positions when people move around. And so to me, depth is also as important for the individual that's in the seat and the person that's coming in afterward, because continuity is so important. And so I think initially when a person moves into a position, they need to look at, what goals they want to set and where they want to be 6 months, a year to 2 years and whatnot. But they also need to make sure that they're setting up the individual that's coming in next to have a seamless program. And I know that people might chuckle and laugh about that because a lot of times we come in these positions and we're cleaning up everything that happened before, or there was no program to begin with and now we're starting from scratch. But continuity is very important. And I think it says a lot about depth in the individual's career and what they leave behind.
So, I mean, yeah, some great words there, right? And some thought process. So I think just to kind of summarize it, right? There's a balance and there's a benefit to both, right? If you're spread too thin, then is that going to be a problem? Probably. If you're siloed out, is that going to limit your options? Probably. So if you're challenging yourself consistently to drive a little bit more and widen your experience, deepen your knowledge, you can kind of get that breadth and depth piece, that balance, and making sure that those records reflect. And then also working on being able to articulate how that all weaves together. Because when it comes to those leadership roles and to those unique opportunities, it's going to be about, did I have the right level of experience and knowledge and capability? And was I able to articulate it to whatever panel, to whatever person, or to whatever job that I was trying to obtain from that, right? And then when you look in the mirror at the end of the day, and when you hang up the uniform, is what did I get out of it, right? As far as personal perseverance and personal accomplishment as well. So to all the gladiators out there, I challenge you to stay a little bit uncomfortable by taking on challenges that are abnormal. Challenge yourself to learn something new every day about what you do and why you do it. And then what you'll find is that you'll learn something about yourself, you'll learn something about your job, and then you'll have something more to give back to Big Blue there. So thank you for your time, Sergeant Estes, Captain Gonzalez. I appreciate it. Right? Thank you for the conversation. I thought it was definitely helpful. And to gladiators out there, thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your dedication. Thank you for all that you do for your nation and for this wing. And remember, stab your enemies in the face through cyberspace.